When you're playing an MMO, there's this illusion that the things that you accomplish last forever that I think makes the experience feel a lot more enjoyable. And I think classic WoW is really, really good at capturing that. Things such as being able to get gear that you can take into the future, the necessity to work with other people, making it so that way it feels like an investment when you find a group that you can play with and really enjoy your time. And of course, things such as learning about the game engine. For a new player, even trying to attack this toad here is a little clunky, and they will do stuff like this, or they'll accidentally run past a mob and they'll have left click and then have to actually click their auto attack and back up and do all sorts of weird crap, which you probably don't have a whole lot of appreciation for at this point. I imagine that you know how to play the game. But there are some things that the game can't give you in Season of Discovery, in my opinion. That would be character progression is a little bit clunky because you just know that anything you achieve item wise on your character while you're leveling up will not really have relevance in the future on average. That's not completely true, of course. There are things from earlier phases that are very good, and I think that's a little bit interesting, but you don't have the feeling that that's going to necessarily be the case while you're in the current phase. Whereas when you were doing Molten Core or Blackwing Lair back in 2019 and 2020, you were very aware that certain pieces would maintain relevance far into the future. Let's go look at Molten Core loot, for example. This item is not very important, of course, the Eye of Sulphurus. Then there are the bindings. Those are obviously important to people, although I'm not a big fan of legendary items because I think they cause animosity between players. But then there's other pieces, such as Bone Reaver's Edge, people like this, or even Essence of the Pure Flame. This thing is really not all that useful, but it's pretty interesting, and that makes it stick out to people and makes them desire it. Or even just items that look super unique, like this little crown, which I've, as a loot council person, assigned this to many people based on them just wanting it to look good. And that's always convenient. It makes them like the item, it's timeless in that sense. And then there's items such as Onslaught Girdle, which are timeless because the stats rock. Band of Acuria, which I don't think is nearly as good, and plenty of other pieces like Quick Strike Ring, or even aged core leather gloves. Having pieces that you can achieve early on in the game and then are going to be useful for years to come is great. I think it makes it so that your experience feels very meaningful every step of the way. And if you were to quit at some point during phase 1, 2, 3, or even 4 in Classic and then come back to the game, you could have found yourself in AQ or Nax relatively quickly. I think Season of Discovery messes this up just a little bit. In some ways, they get it right in that this Emerald Dream Gear is really easy to get, and quite likely you did some incursions, so that way you just have it for free when you're at max level. But then there's other pieces that can be a little bit annoying. Getting a Blackstone ring with the current meta can be quite challenging, because it's like a 20% drop rate, and you're probably going to be rolling against 4 other people. And that wasn't an issue for me. I actually really liked doing the wild offering runs, but for most people, the prospect of doing 25 runs in a dungeon for one ring is pretty bad. And getting these other wild offering pieces, that seems like a lot of work to people too, and I think it makes them feel a little locked out of doing the current content. I'm not saying that that perception that they have is correct, though. It's not very difficult to just jump into Sunken Temple, especially if you're willing to join a guild. And there's tons of guilds that are recruiting people. There are a lot of guilds that are 6 out of 8, for example, and they just want to have some more friends in them. And they're hoping that once they get a stable roster, they'll be able to solve their problems in Raid. And if you're behind and you're not particularly interested in getting your character all geared, you shouldn't feel entitled to be in a better guild than that, in my opinion. But people don't even realize that this exists. I think they take a slight break from Season of Discovery and think, how could I come back to the game now? I'm behind, because the achievements that you made in the past just don't feel like they carry into the future. And there's all this homework that stacks up if you take a break too, in the form of runes. I still haven't bothered with the Dark Rider rune to get the precise timing stuff because I just wasn't super engaged with the game in the second phase at all. And now it's just a really big homework assignment. And I should go get that at some point. It's not a huge deal for DPS. I'm not going to probably be playing this character a whole bunch. I've swapped to a feral druid, but you got to be able to see where coming back to the game requiring you to have maybe 40 or 50 hours of prep to really be abreast of other players is kind of lame. I hope that this isn't such an issue at level 60 that when they have loot drop in Molten Core, Blackwing Lair, and perhaps even ZG and AQ20, that they find a way to make a few of the pieces at least relevant into the future. Or if not relevant because they're literally this, they could even balance it so that way it's like Azure Song Mageblade, for example. This piece gets outclassed really quickly as future phases come out, but it's not super easy to get a hold of pieces that are actually better than it, even when BWL's out or later raids like AQ, at least not at the start. And I think that's kind of interesting because it means that this piece is kind of cool to get even later in the game. You have a reason to keep coming back to MC. Same with other pieces like these Flame Guard gauntlets. It's not easy to plan out loot in a way where this would be true. But I hope that they could do it so that way when you're playing Season of Discovery at level 60, as time goes on, you want to do all the content over and over again for yourself, not just for your friends, but for yourself. Because that makes it actually something we can depend on wanting to do.